The crystalline halls of the Galactic Federation's elite training station had never been so quiet. Captain Emma Hayes's combat boots echoed through the pristine corridors like thunder, each step sending ripples of panic through the assembled alien staff. A tall, willowy being with translucent skin hastily engaged its personal shield as she passed. Emma barely contained her smirk. If they were this jumpy just watching her walk, the next 24 hours were going to be entertaining as hell. Specimen appears to be maintaining remarkable stability despite elevated local gravity settings. A voice chirped from somewhere above. Emma glanced up to see a floating orb taking readings, its multiple lenses wearing as it adjusted focus. Negative signs of distress or disorientation. That's because this is nothing, Emma called out, causing the orb to retreat several meters in surprise. What have you got this set to, anyway? 1.3 G is. I train at 3 back home. The declaration sent a wave of chittering whispers through the growing crowd of observers. Emma caught fragments of their discussions. Impossible, genetic modification, and her personal favorite. The Deathworlder is obviously malfunctioning. A massive screen on the wall displayed her vital signs, environmental readings, and what appeared to be a constantly updating threat assessment. The numbers were all in red, with multiple warning symbols Emma had never seen before. Beneath her name and rank was a simple designation that made her laugh out loud. Species: human, extreme hazard. Captain Hayes. A voice like grinding glass called out. This way to processing. Please. Try not to break anything. The speaker was a towering insectoid being with iridescent carapace and multiple sets of arms, each holding different scanning devices. His name badge identified him as Senior Administrator Xylith, Safety Protocols Division. All 4 of his eyes tracked her every movement, as if she might spontaneously combust. No promises, Emma replied cheerfully, following him through a series of increasingly secure doorways, each one sealed hermetically behind them with a heavy hiss. But I'll do my best not to accidentally conquer the place. The joke fell flat. Kexlith's antennae went rigid. That is not funny, Captain. We are well aware of human military capabilities. Relax, Administrator. I'm just here for the famous survival course. She paused, then added with a wink, though I gotta say, from what I've seen so far, it might not live up to the hype. They entered a vast circular chamber that looked like a cross between a medical bay and a containment unit. Dozens of different species lined the walls, all maintaining what they probably thought was a safe distance. Emma recognized a few from her xenobiology briefings, a group of crystalline validators from the Rigel system, some methane-breathing Jovians, and even a rare silicum-based warrior from the Outer Rim. All of them were required to complete a year-long survival course before taking command positions in their respective forces. All of them were looking at her like she was either insane or a walking catastrophe. Possibly both. Your species has never attempted this course, Kexlith stated, mandibles clicking in what Emma was starting to recognize as nervous tension. The environmental challenges are significant. Emma stretched, her joints cracking in a way that made several nearby aliens flinch. Yeah, that's what they said about Mars too. We've got retirement communities there now. Before Kexlith could process that disturbing information, a sleek silver door slid open at the far end of the chamber. Through it strode the most decorated alien Emma had seen yet. Chief Instructor Zixtal himself, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the station's lights. So, he rumbled, multiple eyes fixed on Emma, with an intensity that would have made most species uncomfortable. You're the Deathworlder who claims she can complete my course in a single rotation. Emma's grin widened. Finally, someone who might make this interesting. Claims, she said, cracking her knuckles. Sir, with all due respect, I plan to have this done before dinner. Now, Where do we start? Chief Instructor Zixtal's personal briefing chamber was a marvel of alien engineering, with holographic displays covering every surface and environmental controls that could simulate any known atmosphere in the galaxy. Emma noticed that they'd adjusted the room to Earth-standard conditions, a courtesy that made her smile. They were trying so hard to make things comfortable for the dangerous Deathworlder. The Galactic Federation's elite survival course, Zixtal began, his voice resonating through the chamber, has broken the strongest warriors from 1,000 worlds. It is not a test, Captain Hayes. It is a forge. The main hologram flickered to life, displaying a series of environments that would make most species run for their emergency pods. Emma leaned forward, her eyes lighting up like a kid at a candy store. First phase. The acid swamps of Nexus 6, Zixtal announced, mandibles clicking in what might have been pride. The atmospheric acidity levels are sufficient to dissolve standard combat armor in minutes. Reminds me of that hot spring in Yellowstone, Emma mused, making notes on her datapad. The one that turns ravens into skeletons if they fly too close. Used to go camping there with my dad. Zixtal's multiple eyes blinked in rapid succession. You camped near naturally occurring acid pools. Sure did. Makes for great hot dogs if you know how to rig the right kind of spit. She glanced up. Sorry, please continue. The chief instructor needed a moment to recover. Phase 2, the Crystal Desert. Surface temperatures fluctuate between extremes capable of flash freezing or vaporizing most known life forms. Death Valley with extra steps, Emma nodded. Though the crystals are a nice touch. Bet they make navigation interesting. The previous record holder spent 2 months learning to navigate the thermal cycles, Zixtal added, perhaps hoping to impress upon her the gravity of the situation. Emma was already sketching something that looked suspiciously like a makeshift solar still. 2 months. What were they doing? Writing poetry about it. Kexelith, who had been quietly monitoring her vital signs, made a sound like a stressed radiator. Captain, perhaps you don't fully appreciate the lethality of these environments. The methane storm chamber alone. Now that one actually looks fun, Emma interrupted, as the hologram shifted to show swirling clouds of electric blue gas. We get something similar during tornado season back home, minus the methane. Though there was this one time in Oklahoma. The Silicon Warriors of the Outer Rim, Zixtal cut in, his patience visibly fraying, required 8 months to complete the full course. They are considered one of the most resilient species in known space. Emma finally looked up from her notes. 8 months. Seriously. For these vacation spots, she stood and walked through the hologram, studying each environment with a professional's eye. Look, I get that these are supposed to be challenge zones, but from where I'm standing, you've just recreated a pretty standard Earth summer. The room fell silent. Even the ambient hum of the environmental systems seemed to hold its breath. A standard Earth summer. Kexelith finally managed. Well, yeah. Emma started counting off on her fingers. We've got your acid lakes in Wyoming. Death Valley makes your crystal desert look like a beach resort. Florida's got humidity that'll melt your face off plus actual alligators. Kansas has tornadoes that could give your methane storms competition. And don't even get me started on Australia. She turned to face the stunned aliens, a glint of understanding in her eyes. That's why you called us Deathworlders, isn't it? Because our vacation spots are your survival courses. Zixtal drew himself up to his full height. Captain Hayes, I begin to suspect we may have underestimated your species' capabilities. Oh, trust me, Emma said, already walking toward the course entrance. You haven't even begun to see what humans can do. Now, are we going to stand around all day, or are you going to let me show you how we handle things back home? Behind her, Kexelith was frantically updating the station's risk assessment protocols. Somehow, extreme hazard no longer seemed adequate. The viewing chamber erupted in chaos as Captain Emma Hayes stripped down to her base layer of environmental gear, ignoring the frantic warnings blaring through the station speakers. The acid swamps of Nexus 6 churned below, their purple-tinged surface bubbling with caustic promise. "Captain Hayes," Zixtal's voice crackled through the comm, a note of genuine concern breaking through his professional demeanor. "The standard protocol requires 3 days of environmental observation before." "With all due respect, Chief Instructor," Emma cut in, already testing the flexibility of some thick bark she'd spotted near the entry point. "I've seen enough. This isn't much worse than the hot springs back home. Though I gotta say, the color scheme is pretty." She worked with quick, practiced movements, weaving the acid-resistant bark into makeshift footwear. Several of the observing aliens were recording her technique, their data appendages trembling with either fear or excitement. "Impossible," Kexlith muttered, his scanning devices working overtime. "The toxicity levels alone should prevent any carbon-based life form from." Emma didn't let him finish. With a casual salute to the observation window, she dropped into a perfect swan dive, hitting the acid swamp with the grace of someone jumping into a swimming pool. Several aliens actually fainted. She surfaced a moment later, reading the environment like a book. "You've got some interesting current patterns down here," she called up, her voice clear through the comm link. "The acids creating convection flows you can use to navigate. Pretty much like river reading, just spicier." The observation deck was dead silent as Emma began moving through the swamp with fluid efficiency, where other species had crawled along the edges. Testing each step with expensive equipment, she was swimming through the heart of it, using the very currents that made the swamp lethal to power her movement. "See these bubble patterns?" She pointed to a series of regular eruptions. "They're on a cycle, if you time it right." She waited for a moment, then let a large bubble carry her forward several meters. Free transportation. Zixtal's mandibles were clicking so fast, they created a continuous hum. "Captain, you've just covered more distance in 10 minutes than most species manage in a week." "Really?" Emma paused to examine some crystal formations growing along the swamp's edge. "Oh, these are nice. Remind me of the mineral deposits in Yellowstone." "Hey, has anyone ever tried using these for navigation? They're growing in a clear pattern." Before anyone could answer, she'd already mapped out a network of the formations, creating a natural grid system that made the entire swamp layout clear. The aliens watching began frantically taking notes. "And look here," she continued, seemingly oblivious to the revolutionary nature of her discoveries. "These floating mats of whatever they are actually form natural bridges. The acid current underneath keeps them stable. You could probably cross the whole swamp without getting wet if you're patient." Kexlith had given up on his instruments and was simply staring. "She's not just surviving," he whispered to Zixtal. "She's rewriting our understanding of the entire environment." Emma's voice crackled through again, now from the far side of the swamp. "Hey, quick question. Was I supposed to find the hidden safety bunker? Because either I just found your emergency shelter, or something really big makes its home down here." "That bunker location is classified," Zixtal sputtered. "It took our previous record holder 3 weeks to." "Never mind, found another one," Emma called out cheerfully. "You've got a whole network of these, don't you? Smart design, using the acid flows for camouflage. Though you might want to relocate the one near the western edge. Those crystal formations are growing right toward it." Less than 2 hours after she'd first dropped in, Emma pulled herself out of the swamp on the far side, her makeshift bark shoes still intact. She was dripping with acid that should have dissolved any living being, yet she looked like she'd just finished a refreshing swim. "So," she said, wringing out her hair, "that's phase 1 done. Anyone up for learning some earth swimming techniques? could probably cut your completion time down to about an hour once you get the hang of it. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Xylith's datapad shattering on the floor. The crystal desert stretched out before Emma like a mad geometrist's dream. Countless prismatic spires reaching toward the artificial sky. The temperature display on her wrist unit was already flashing warning signals. Surface temperature cycling between minus 170 degrees Celsius and plus 180 degrees Celsius every 15 minutes. 2 months to cross this. Emma mused, already shrugging off the heavy environmental suit the station had provided. What were they doing? Taking scenic routes. Captain Hayes. Xylith's voice had reached a new pitch of alarm. The protective gear is mandatory for species that haven't grown up running search and rescue in Death Valley. Emma finished, now down to her standard issue Earth military thermal gear. Trust me, this'll work better. Those suits are too bulky for what I have in mind. She pulled out a small device from her pack that had the aliens leaning forward in curiosity. Standard issue solar compass, she explained, though it looked like she'd modified it significantly. And now, let me show you why humans are the galaxy's best geologists. Without warning, she sprinted forward and leaped onto the nearest crystal formation. The aliens gasped collectively as she began moving across the crystal field like a mountain goat, each step precisely calculated. See these stress patterns, she called out, pointing to nearly invisible lines in the crystals. They're telling us everything we need to know. Direction of growth, stability points, and she tapped one crystal with her knuckle, listening to the ring. Yep, water content. Zixtal's voice crackled through the comm. Water content. Those crystals are solid throughout. Our scans. Your scans, Emma interrupted, already setting up some small device she'd pulled from her pack, aren't taking into account the basic principles of thermal expansion and contraction. Watch this. She placed the device, which turned out to be a modified heat reflector, at a precise angle. As the temperature cycle hit its peak, a sharp crack echoed across the desert. A perfect line appeared in the crystal, and water began seeping out. Ladies, gentlemen, and various other beings, Emma announced with a flourish, I give you the world's fanciest water cooler. The temperature swings you thought made this place deadly. They're actually the key to survival. The observation room erupted in chaotic discussion as Emma began setting up more reflectors, creating a network of water collection points. She moved through the crystal field like she was born there, using the formations themselves as both shield and tool. The crystals aren't just obstacles, she explained while setting up another collection point. They're resources. Each one is like a little solar still, trapping and purifying water through the temperature cycles. Plus, she paused to check her compass. They're growing in a pattern that points straight to the exit. That's not possible, one of the scientific observers protested. The growth patterns are random. Random like a river's random, Emma called back, already a quarter of the way across the field. Sure, it looks chaotic up close, but step back and the pattern's clear as day. These crystals are following underground water flows, basic Earth geology, just with more sparkle. She reached a particularly large formation and began scaling it with practiced ease. Fun fact, the way these things refract light, you can use them as navigation beacons. The bigger ones show you where the stable paths are. It's like having a highway map written in rainbows. As if to demonstrate, she slid down the far side of the crystal, landing on a perfect natural bridge between formations. The aliens watched in stunned silence as she practically danced across the desert, turning their deadliest training ground into her personal playground. Oh, and here's a cool trick, she added, setting up one final device. If you angle these just right, she adjusted the reflector, and suddenly a path of stable temperature zones became visible in the air, created by the redirected heat and light. 3 hours after entering the crystal desert, Emma was already at the exit point, a collection of water samples neatly labeled in her pack and a map of safe passages marked out behind her. "So," she said, taking a sip from her crystal-purified water, "who wants to learn about Earth mountaineering techniques? Could really speed up your current training program." In the observation room, Zixtal was already drafting a complete revision of the course's difficulty rankings. The methane storm chamber was a swirling vortex of electric blue chaos, lightning arcing between clouds and patterns that would make Tesla proud. The observation deck had filled to capacity, with aliens from every level of the station crowding to watch the Deathworlder's next performance. Even the Silicon Warriors had abandoned their training to witness what was quickly becoming legend. "Now this," Emma said, her eyes reflecting the electric dance above, "this feels like home. Reminds me of storm season in Oklahoma, minus the trailer parks flying around." Kexelith had given up on reading his instruments. "The electrical discharge levels are beyond safe parameters," he announced, though it sounded more like a surrender than a warning. "The methane concentration makes for some really interesting conductivity patterns," Emma finished, already pulling equipment from her pack. "Check this out. Basic Franklin kit, modified for extra spice." She assembled what looked like a primitive lightning rod, but with modifications that had the scientific observers scrambling to update their notes. The device hummed to life, small lights blinking in sequence. "Back home, we've got these folks called storm chasers," Emma explained, making final adjustments. "Most people run from tornadoes. These crazy people run toward them. Been doing it since the 1970s. And let me tell you, what they don't know about electric storms isn't worth knowing." Without warning, she activated the device. A controlled arc of lightning connected with it, the energy flowing through a series of converters she'd somehow built from standard emergency kit parts. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced over the comm, "I give you the world's fanciest battery charger. These storms you're so scared of, they're just free power with extra light shows." The aliens watched in disbelief as Emma began moving through the chamber, using the modified Franklin kit to not just survive the storm, but to actually ride the electrical currents. She surfed the energy fields like a pro snowboarder, each lightning strike propelling her in a calculated direction. "The thing about electrical storms," she called out while executing a perfect mid-air turn, "is that they're actually pretty predictable, if you know what to look for. The methane just makes the patterns easier to see. It's like nature's own neon sign." She paused at a junction of particularly intense activity, setting up another device. "Watch this. If you time it right." A massive bolt struck her equipment, but instead of destruction, it created a stable energy field. Instant safe zone. "We used to build these for emergency shelters during tornado season." Zixtal's voice crackled through the comm, filled with a mix of horror and awe. "Captain Hayes, are you suggesting that your species regularly encounters natural phenomena of this magnitude?" "Regular as rain," Emma laughed, actually doing a backflip through a particularly beautiful lightning pattern. "Though I gotta admit, the methane adds a nice touch. Makes everything pretty colors. Back home, you just get the regular white-blue lightning." She was now creating a network of safe zones throughout the chamber, each one positioned to take advantage of the storm's natural flow. "See how the energy moves in cycles? If you map it out, you can pretty much walk through any storm. Basic weather science, just with more pizzazz." The aliens watched as she demonstrated, moving from zone to zone with the confidence of someone taking a Sunday stroll. What had been designed as a brutal survival challenge had become her personal light show. "Hey," she called out, now standing in the heart of the storm, energy dancing around her like a living aurora. Anyone ever try using these storms for power generation? Because I'm getting some really interesting readings here. Could probably power the whole station with just one chamber. In the observation room, a team of engineers was already frantically taking notes, their previous understanding of impossible crumbling with each passing second. Just under an hour after entering, Emma emerged from the chamber, her hair standing slightly on end, but otherwise looking like she just had the time of her life. "So," she said, checking the power levels on her now fully charged equipment, "who wants to learn about Earth weather patterns? Fair warning though, the training videos include some pretty wild tornado footage." Behind her, the storm continued to rage, but now it seemed less like a deadly challenge and more like a missing page from Earth's weather forecast. In the secure command center of the elite training station, the highest-ranking officers of the Galactic Federation had gathered for an emergency session. Holoprojectors displayed Emma's progress through each challenge, while banks of quantum computers analyzed every move she'd made. The room was silent except for the soft hum of processing units and the occasional nervous click of mandibles. "It doesn't make sense," Admiral Vectora, a veteran of 1,000 battles, muttered as she rewatched Emma surfing the methane lightning. "Their planet should have killed them. Everything we know about evolution says they shouldn't exist." Zixtel stepped forward, his ceremonial armor now bearing stress marks from hours of tense observation. "With all due respect, Admiral, I believe we've been looking at this entirely wrong. We haven't been testing a Deathworlder. We've been testing the galaxy's ultimate survival specialist." The holoprojectors shifted to show Earth's various biomes. Images of hurricane-force winds, volcanic eruptions, flash floods, and desert extremes played in sequence. Alongside each one, Emma's techniques from the course were shown in parallel. "Look here," Kexlith pointed, his scientific training finally making connections. "The way she handled the acid swamps, it's nearly identical to how their species navigates these hot springs. And the crystal desert solutions, they're adaptations of techniques used in something called the Grand Canyon." A junior analyst, one of the methane-breathing Jovians, bubbled excitedly. "Their training programs routinely expose them to conditions we consider lethal. They call it extreme sports." The room erupted in murmurs as more data poured in. Earth's history began to unfold before them. A story not of simple survival, but of continuous adaptation and conquest over natural forces that should have been insurmountable. "They don't just survive these conditions," Sixtol realized, his voice filled with growing awe. "They turn them into recreational activities. Where we see death, they see challenge, adventure, fun." Admiral Vectora leaned forward, her crystalline features catching the light. "Are you suggesting that we've fundamentally misunderstood human classification? That Deathworld is an insufficient term." "More than that," Silith responded, pulling up new data streams. "Earth isn't just a Deathworld. It's a training ground. Every natural disaster, every extreme condition, every deadly environment has forced them to innovate, to adapt, to overcome. They haven't just survived their planet. They've mastered it." The holoprojectors now showed Emma's current position. She was sitting casually in the recovery zone between phases, teaching a group of fascinated alien trainees how to create water condensers from basic equipment. Her laughter echoed through the chamber as she demonstrated a technique that had taken other species centuries to develop. "Look at how freely she shares knowledge," one of the Silicon warriors observed. "No hesitation, no superiority. Just pure joy in teaching others to survive." Zixtel straightened, coming to a decision. "We need to reclassify Earth immediately. Not as a warning, but as a resource. Their planet hasn't created monsters. It's created teachers. Every human is a walking library of survival knowledge, tested against conditions that would break most species." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting we change our entire approach to human integration into the Federation. I'm suggesting, Sixtel replied, watching as Emma now demonstrated proper lightning writing technique to an enthusiastic audience, that we've been given a gift. The very forces that should have destroyed humanity have instead forged them into something unprecedented. A species that treats survival as an art form and takes joy in sharing that art with others. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. On the monitors, Emma was now drawing diagrams in the air, explaining Earth weather patterns to a group that included some of the Federation's most experienced survival instructors. They were taking notes. "Well," Admiral Vectora finally said, a hint of amusement in her crystalline voice, "it seems we need to update our training manuals, and perhaps consider opening a new department, something along the lines of human survival arts and sciences." In the background, Emma's voice carried through the speakers. "And that's just basic storm writing. Wait until I tell you about volcano boarding." The final challenge chamber was a perfect void. An enormous space of absolute nothingness, scattered with floating debris and artificial satellites that created a maze between entry and exit points. The temperature readouts showed near absolute zero in the shadows and scorching heat in the direct light of the artificial star. Finally, Emma said, already suiting up in what the aliens recognized as surprisingly primitive space gear, something actually challenging. "Space is the one thing that really tries to kill you." Kexlith, who had given up on predicting her reactions hours ago, still felt compelled to warn her. "Captain Hayes, this environment has no margin for error. The previous record for 3 weeks, right?" Emma interrupted, checking the seals on her suit with practiced efficiency. "Yeah, that's because they were thinking about it wrong. Space isn't about surviving. It's about dancing." Before anyone could process that statement, she had already activated the airlock. The aliens watched in fascination as she pushed off with a perfect vector, using the momentum in a way that spoke of years of experience. "See, here's the thing about zero-G." Her voice came through clear and casual, as if she were giving a lecture at a coffee shop rather than floating through hard vacuum. "It's all about physics. Every push has an equal and opposite reaction. NASA figured this out back in the 1960s, when most of our computing power came from slide rules and determination." She demonstrated by using a piece of debris as a pivot point, converting her linear momentum into a curved path that threaded through a particularly dense cluster of obstacles. "Watch this. It's called a gravity assist," she announced, using the mass of a larger object to slingshot herself toward a new vector. "We've been doing this with spacecraft since before we had color TV. Works on any scale if you know the math." Zixtel's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Your species has been practicing vacuum navigation since before digital computing." "Oh yeah," Emma laughed, the sound bright in the comm system. "Ever heard of the Apollo program? We went to our moon using computers less powerful than a modern kitchen appliance. The astronauts had to do most of the math by hand." She paused to make some adjustments to her suit's settings. "Fun fact: every human who goes through basic space training learns manual orbital calculations. You know, just in case the computers fail. We call it the Apollo Protocol." The observation deck had fallen silent, watching as Emma transformed the deadly void into an orbital ballet. She used every piece of debris, every temperature gradient, and every radiation shadow to her advantage. "The trick with space," she continued, now using her suit's maneuvering jets with surgical precision, "is that it's actually pretty predictable. No air resistance, no random currents, just pure Newtonian physics. Once you get the hang of it, it's like playing pool in 3 dimensions." She demonstrated by using a series of perfectly calculated bounces off debris to conservation fuel while maintaining her course. The alien engineers were frantically recording her techniques. "And here's something cool we learned from our satellites," Emma added, pulling out what looked like a simple metal sheet. "Solar sailing. All you need is a reflective surface and some patience. The light pressure does all the work." The aliens watched in amazement as she used the improvised solar sail to gradually alter her course, taking advantage of the artificial star's radiation, just as ancient Earth sailors had used the wind. "Of course," she added casually, "this is pretty basic stuff. You should see what our space station crews do during their recreation hours. Ever heard of zero-G acrobatics or orbital parkour?" Less than 40 minutes after entering the void, Emma was already at the exit point, having completed a course that usually took weeks in less than an hour. "So," she said, removing her helmet with a grin, "who wants to learn about human space history? Fair warning, though. The story about how we fixed the Hubble telescope might make some of you nervous." In the control room, the Federation's space navigation experts were already drafting requests for human instructors. After all, any species that treated the void of space as a dance floor clearly had something to teach the galaxy. The graduation chamber of the elite training station had never been so crowded. Representatives from every major species in the Galactic Federation had dropped whatever they were doing and made emergency FTL jumps to witness this historic moment. The room, designed to hold 500, now strained to contain over 2,000 beings. Captain Emma Hayes stood at the center of it all, still in her slightly singed Earth military uniform, looking more like she'd just finished a light workout than completed the galaxy's deadliest training course in record time. The digital display behind her showed the final time: 23 hours, 47 minutes, and 12 seconds. "Well," she said, breaking the awe-struck silence, "that was fun. Though I gotta say, you might want to add some real challenges for the advanced course. Maybe some active volcanoes or hurricane simulation." Admiral Vectora stepped forward, her crystalline form catching the light, in a display that would have been intimidating to most species. "Captain Hayes, in the 10,000 years since this facility's establishment, no one has ever—" She paused, searching for the right words. "You didn't just break the record. You redefined what we thought was possible." "Oh, that's not even the best part," Emma grinned, pulling out her data tablet. "I took notes, got some ideas for improvements that could make the course more efficient. Also, did you know you could power the entire station just using the energy from the methane storm chamber? Seems like a waste to just let it run for training." The room erupted in excited whispers as she casually handed over a complete redesign of their power systems, sketched out during her breaks between challenges. Zixtel, who had watched every second of her run, finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "Captain, how did your species develop these skills? The calculations, the adaptations, the sheer variety of survival techniques." Emma's smile softened. "We had a really good teacher, Earth. Everything I did today, that's just Tuesday back home. Our planet never gave us a choice. We had to learn to swim, so we became Olympic athletes. We had to handle storms, so we became storm chasers. We had to deal with space, so we turned it into a science." She gestured to the assembled crowd. "The thing is, every challenge you built into this course, we've already faced naturally. Acid rain. Got that. Extreme temperatures. Death Valley and Antarctica say hi. Electrical storms. Tornado Alley would like a word. Space. We've been playing there since we were barely out of the Stone Age, relatively speaking." Admiral Vectora's expression shifted to one of understanding. "You're saying that Earth itself is the greatest training course ever designed?" Emma finished. "Exactly. And the best part? We're happy to share what we've learned. Because that's another thing Earth taught us. Survival is a team sport. The Admiral exchanged glances with the other Federation leaders present. A decision that should have required months of debate took only seconds of silent communication. Captain Hayes, Vector announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We would like to offer you a position as Chief Instructor of our new Human Survival Arts Division. We need teachers like you. Emma's eyes lit up with the same excitement she'd shown when first seeing the acid swamps. Ma'am, I would be honored. Though I have one condition. The room held its breath. We're gonna need a bigger training ground, she said with a grin. And I know just the planet. Ever heard of Australia? The ceremony that followed was brief. Emma had already mentioned she had plans to go mountain climbing that evening, to unwind. But as she left the chamber, she paused at the door and turned back to the still assembled crowd. Oh, and just so you know, she added with a wink, what I showed you today. That's just the basic stuff. Wait until you see what our extreme sports enthusiasts can do. As the door closed behind her, the sound of 2,000 beings simultaneously updating their understanding of the word basic echoed through the station. In the years that followed, that day would be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned an important truth. Earth wasn't a death world. It was the universe's most advanced training academy, and humans were its graduated class.